So now I am recording the webinar. This webinar will cover the data analytics tool, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so what is the data analytics tool? It is a tool for generating custom reports, queries, dashboard widgets, exports, mail merges. This tool also gives you access to pretty much any data that you store in the database, including your student information, your family information, even any sort of custom defined attributes or contract options or forms actions. So pretty much anything that you have in the database, you can use the data analytics tool to click on it and run reports on it. Now, what is the main differences between the DMT, the data mining tool, and the DAT data analytics tool? The core is that the DAT allows you to determine the path for connecting different nodes or tables in the database, whereas DMT had a predefined path for each combination of data points. This new feature becomes extremely handy when we consider such cases as, for example, connecting students to teachers. In DMT, the predefined path for this selection will select all students who take classes from the selected teachers. In DAT, you can actually choose how you want to connect students to teachers. So, like when you use DMT, you pick the student information, and if you pick teacher information in the same report, the system automatically only finds those students that take classes with those teachers. Whereas in the DAT, you can pick whether you want students that take classes with the teacher or you want students that are linked to those teachers' households, meaning that teachers who are also parents. So just as a quick example, I have this report called Students Linked to Staff Households, and I have another one called Students Taking Classes from Teachers. So just to demonstrate how that kind of works is that if I go to edit, what I have done is I've connected the student information with the student courses table, the course sections with the teachers. So what that does is when I run the report, it shows me the list of all the students and what teachers they are connected to in terms of what teachers they are taking classes with. Because I specified in my path, my query path, I specified how I wanted to connect the student information to the teacher information. That's how it displays the result. In my second scenario, so if I go back to my this group, so in my second scenario, I have students linked to staff households. So the difference here is that I've connected student information with I've connected it to the relationship, and then I have connected that relationship to family information, and then I have connected that to the teacher first name and last name. So if I run this particular report, I only get those students that are linked to a staff member in terms of that they are linked to the same household. So these staff members would be the parents of your existing students in the database. So some of these reports will automatically be deployed to your database. So we'll do that pretty soon in the next few weeks. We'll deploy some of the reports that many schools use that way. You don't have to build them yourself. But this was just a way to demonstrate an example of how you can grab the similar information from similar information in both reports, but one report may give you staff that are households, and another report may give you staff members who actually teach the student. So let's actually go ahead and start building some reports. So before I do that, if you are under DAT, when you are starting to build a report, you can click New on the left-hand side. And you see many different categories. You have your actions, you have administrative, admissions, and so forth. And since we're covering the admin and admissions today, the table that you'll be using most for admin is going to be your under students. There's an info table. This is one of the tables that you'll use the most because it has all the basic student information like their name, their ID, their status, their substatus, their grade levels, and so forth, like all of the basic student information. So when you're building reports related to students, you're almost always going to use this table. So this is one of the table you use the most. The other table that you use the most is the under admissions inquiries. This would be something that you would use to run queries on your admissions data, your applicants, and so forth. So inquiries would give you similar information to the student table, but this time it gives you information about your applicants and inquiries. So their first name, their last name, their ID, their phone number, and so forth. The other major table that you would use in both admissions and admin would be your households table. Households table will give you all of your family information like the address, salutation, your parent information, and so forth. So that's something that you'll most likely use, especially if you're trying to link students and find like their parent information or their addresses and things like that. If you're not sure, let's say that you're trying to add the student name in your report, but you're not sure where that might be, you can come and search for it. So if you're searching for a particular table, you can put the table name, but most likely you want to search for the field because you might try to find where the student first name field is. So if I just type in student first name, it gives me what table it is under. So since initially I said that info would be one of the most used table, it tells me that this is where student first name is found. So if I want, I can click select and it'll add that table for me in my report. So these are some of the most common tables that you'll be using in your reports. Other tables you may use depending on what parts of the systems that you work with, but in terms of admissions and admin, those will be most used. Then the secondary or the second most common tables that you'll use would be your student actions table. Student actions will give you, so let's say that you're doing forms. So as parents submit the forms, each page has a action link to it. So for example, in your forms, if you have like photo release or a handbook policy or field trip permission, if those are different sections in your forms, each section will have an action. So you can use student actions to find all of the students that have completed their handbook policy or submitted their photo release, their field trip permission, and so forth. And we're actually going to cover that report later on in the webinar. And then other common tables would be your student attributes table. So under student, you have attributes. This is where all of your custom fields are stored. So that might be something that you'll be using often. And then under the admission side, similarly, you'll probably be using inquiry actions a lot. This would help you find all of your all of your applicants that may have submitted the application, or they may have turned in their forms like a transcript form or any sort of information that comes from the applicant side. And inquiry actions are used to track where someone the application. So if they have started the application, if they have submitted the application, if they have submitted their recommendation forms, things like that, you can use this table to find. And then similar to student attributes, we have inquiry attributes. This is where all of the custom fields are stored in the online application. So you can use this table to query on those custom fields, which could be pretty much anything. So these are some of the other more common tables that you'll be using. So let's start by building our first report. So in my first report, I want to find all of my applicants that have applied for 9th grade or higher. So the way that I go here is that I go to my admissions. Since I'm trying to find applicant information, I go to admissions and I click inquiries. And this gives me all the information related to my inquiries table, like their name and so forth. So I'm just going to grab maybe the inquiry ID, the inquiry first name, inquiry last name, maybe the academic year that they're applying for, maybe they're applying for grade. Actually, I'm going to use applying for grade number. The reason I like using applying for grade number is because it's easier to sort by. Because applying for grade could be, let's say that if you have kindergartners, it could be JK, and it would come in alphabetical order after your normal grade level. So it would be like 1 through 12, then it could be JK and K and so forth. But if I do applying for grade level number, I can actually show my junior kindergarten, my kindergarten, and then all of my other grade levels, because the number assigned to JK and K could be like -1 or -2, and then all of my other numbers would come after that. So it's easier to sort it that way. Sure, I could also add applying for grade just so I could also see the description if needed. So I'm gonna say I have the fields that I need. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a conditions to find anybody that has applied for grade level 9 or higher. So I would go here under conditions. So this part is somewhat similar to the DMT, except that we have more operators available. So I would say applying grade level number greater than equal to 9. And then I would click add to the right hand side. And then I'll go ahead and click save here. And then I can just click results to run my report. This part is also similar to DMT. So let me move to the next part of the report. So this time I'm just going to begin a new report, and I'm going to use the first name, last name from the admissions table. So I picked my inquiries table, and this time I think what was throwing off was the grade level that I was adding. So this time I'm not going to add that. And I'm just going to put in the inquiry ID, the inquiry first name, inquiry last name. And then let me go ahead and save this field. And let me first run it to make sure that I'm getting results in my report. So far I have my inquiry ID, I have inquiry first, I have inquiry last name. And then I'm going to go ahead and add other information such as status, substatus, and then I can add the gender, and I can add the academic year. So I'll go ahead and add academic year. I'll go ahead and add, I can add the gender, I can add the status, I can add the substatus, and let me go ahead and save it and run the report. Now let's say that I organize my report so that the inquiry last name is the first column, and then inquiry first name, and then the ID, and then this other information. The way that I do it is that I go to order here, and then I can just grab this and move it around. So I can say that I want to show inquiry last name first, and then inquiry first name, and then inquiry ID, then academic year. Then I can show the sex, and then the status and the substatus. So in the DMT, you had to click on the arrows to move them up and down, and it would take a long time to kind of move fields from to the bottom to the top, and vice versa. In the DAT, you can simply grab a field and just move it up and down. So now that I have organized my fields, if I click results, it should organize them in that specific column. So now I have my inquiry first name, last name, and so forth. So if I go back to under the other thing that I can say is that, let's say that instead of calling it inquiry last name, inquiry first name, or let's say if I wanted to sex to gender, or if I wanted to change the columns that I have in my report, I can go to fields to the left hand side, and there is an alias here column. So I can go in and type in how I want to display my columns, or how I want to name my columns. So for example, if I want to say, instead of saying inquiry last name or inquiry first, I just wanted to say last name and first name, I can type that in the alias and click save and click run. And it would switch the columns to whatever my alias was. So this is a new feature that was not available in the data mining tool. So even if I export the data, I can click export the data. So even if I export the data, these column names will be the same. So this is a way that you can kind of rename your columns in your report instead of having the predefined column names show up. Okay, I just want to make sure that this report, at least the first part, runs. All right, academic year. And then let me go ahead and save it. Okay. All right, I think this time it should work. So I'll go ahead and add the birth date here. And then I'll go ahead and run my report. So the other thing that I wanted to show you was that so aside from ordering the column, so I'm gonna go ahead and make it the last name, first name, inquiry ID, and then I'll move the birth date here. I'll put the academic year and the inquiry ID. So I have last name, first name, birth date, academic year, inquiry ID, and then let me go ahead and run. So now I have all of my applicants, and I have the list of all the applicants and what academic years they have applied for. And then let me go ahead and add the condition for the academic year and see if I can get that to work. So if I say academic year equals 16-17. Okay, great. So if I go to my fields, one other thing that I wanted to show you is that in the display format for certain fields, such as like birth date, you can go, like for date fields, you can go in. So for date fields and for like amount fields for finance payments and things, you can specify a display format. So for example, let's say that I wanted to show the month, the day, the day of the week, and the year. I could select this and click save, and then I can run my report, and it would produce the result in that format. So in some cases, you may want different format than in other cases, especially if you're trying to export it out and display it elsewhere. So if you go to query, you can use the display format to specify what kind of way you want to display a certain field. So this is a new feature as well that was not available in the DAT. Now, okay, so now the other thing that I kind of want to go over, let's say that in my condition, I have specified the academic year of 16-17, and then I'm also going to add another condition. Let's say that I only want people with the substatus of applicant. If I run the report, I should get all of my applicants who have the status of an applicant. So I don't necessarily have to display the field in my report. I can put a condition on a field even without displaying it. So in my case here, I say status equals applicant as a condition on this report, even though I am not showing that status in my report. So if I did want to show it, I can just check this off here and then click save it and run, and then I can actually see the status in my report. So the other new feature is that if you were to go to query and you open up your table again, there's something called parameterize. If you check off this option here, what this allows you to do is you can change this condition in your report without having to go back and forth. So for example, let's say that I check this option here and then I click save. And if I click run, I see all of my applicants, but as my report is run, let's say I want to switch over to anybody that is an inquiry instead of an applicant. I can type in inquiry and click apply new parameter, and then it'll start my report to show me all the inquiries that I have in the system. So this is a way to quickly have an original condition, and then in your live report you can quickly switch it to something else. So you don't have to go to query and then remove the previous condition, add another condition, and then run the report. you can simply come here and sort different status, substatus, grade level, whatever condition you may use use to for this functionality. So this is what I have done, and let me go ahead and run. Okay, so I have my all of my records with the status of copied. Okay, so the another item that I'd like to cover is called functional parameters. In DMT, let's say that you're trying to find anybody who applied in the 16-17 year, or who applied in the 17-18 year, or 18-19 year, or so forth. In the DMT, you would do something similar to this. You would come here, you would say academic year equals 16-17 or 17-18 or so forth, and it would give you those particular results. However, let's say that I created this report for my 16-17 year, but then next year I want the same report but for the 17-18 year. In DMT, I would come back, open my report, delete this condition, and then add another condition for the new academic year that I need to use going forward. However, in the DAT, what you can possibly do is, instead of saying equal to a particular year, you can say something like academic year admissions. Since I'm pulling up my inquiry records, you can say academic year admissions. And you can pick one of these years. So you can say like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 9 years later. So you can go before 9 years before or 9 years after. So if I say 1 year ago and click add, and then I click run or save and then run my report, since my admissions year is in the 17-18 year, 1 year ago would be 16-17. That's why this is what I get. However, if let's say that after close of the school year, if I run the same report, instead of saying 16-17, this would automatically update for me to 17-18. That way, you can build one report or one version of the report, and instead of specifying a particular value, especially the academic year, you can just put in a functional parameter. So as your year changes each year, you won't have to update the report. It'll automatically do it for you. So as you're creating similar reports, we would suggest that use a functional parameter, then a specific one. That way you don't have to keep updating the report each year, which you would have to do in your DMT functionality. So this was the functional parameter. So now let me move on to the next part. One moment. Okay, so now I want to talk about. So let me go back, run my report. This time I'm just gonna apply the. I'll just remove this for now and just get my applicants again. All right, so for this next report, let's say that I want any of these inquiries, and I'll actually even remove the status of applicant. Let's say that I want any inquiry that came in last year, so in the 16-17 year, and they are boarding. So I'm gonna go here and say where it says they are boarding. All right, so let me. So I would say they are boarding equals boarding in my case here. And then let's say that I wanted to know that if they were referred by a current family, I can use the inquiry source and I can say current family. Now, for example, I wanted to find anybody who is either applying for 16-17 year and who is applying for either boarding or was referred to by a current family. By default, if I run this particular report, it doesn't give me any results because I don't have anybody in my system that is in the 16-17 year and is boarding and was referred to by a current family. But what I can do is I can put in or conditions, or I can use parentheses and put or conditions in two or more lines as well. So for example, if I wanted to find anybody who applied last year, or who was boarding, or who was referred by a current family. Instead of and, I can just put or. And I'm actually going to display this information here. So I'm going to go ahead and display the inquiry source. And I'm going to go ahead and display the day you're boarding as well. And let me run the report again. So I would expect some results because I put in an or condition. So just as an example, this person is an applicant, and so let me double check with my condition. So I said that academic year would be last year. So let me run. So basically, in this case, anybody that was either in the academic year of 16-17 or board or current source would be a current or the inquiry source would be a current family. So in this case, this person is in 2009, 2010, but because they were referred to by a current family, that's why they show up. When I put an and condition, they wouldn't show up. So this is a good way to kind of, if you have multiple conditions in one report, and you want to, and so if you have multiple conditions in a report, and you want to kind of run your query to say that, okay, whether this condition or that condition is true, I still want to pull records. You can use the logic here to put in an and or condition. You can also use parentheses. So you can say something like that they should be in the academic year last year, and they should either be boarding or they should be referred by a current family. You can do that, or you can say that they should have inquired in the last year, but they should be both boarding and current family. In that case, you would say or here, and then here you would say and. What that means is that they should have applied last year, or they should be both boarding and current family. So this is kind of a way that you can add advanced conditions to your report and specify exactly how you may want to pull your data. So let me go ahead and move on to the report. So let me pull that up. So the next report that I'll go ahead and do is called Students with Forms Action. So basically the purpose of that report is to kind of show you how the joins work in the DAT, and I'll kind of go over what the difference is in terms of joining in DAT and DMT. So in this report, my goal is to find all students that submitted their forms, or meaning in the form have submitted their handbook policy, their photo release, and their field trip permissions. And I want to know whether or not they have submitted those items. So because this would be forms are linked to the student records, this time instead of using my admissions group, this time I'm actually going to use my students group, and I'm going to click on info. So when I click on info, I have all of these fields that we covered earlier about student information. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe grab the student ID, grab the student last name, grab the student first name. So for now, I'm just going to grab these fields and I'll go ahead and run my report just to make sure that it's produced. So I have 934 student records in my report. Now, I'm going to go ahead and order. So I don't like putting the student ID in the middle. So I'll go ahead and click order, maybe put the last name first name after that, and then maybe the student ID. So now I have ordered it. So now I just have all of my students that are in the system, which is 934. So this time I want to find anybody who has submitted their handbook policy in the forms module. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most common tables that you would use is student actions, because in each section of the form, when they save that page, it'll create an action on the student record. So what I do is that I'm going to take my table that I have student information, and I'm going to what we call join or combine it with the student actions table. The way that I do that is I click the plus sign on the left hand side, and then here it says info. So this is my first table. And then here I have with or without. I'm going to demonstrate the uses of both, but I'll start off with first. And then I'm going to connect it to one of my other tables. So as I mentioned earlier, student actions would be one of the most common tables that you use. I'm going to go ahead and connect it to student actions. Now I have all these different fields. So I want to know who has submitted a handbook policy. So action description stores that information. So I would say action description equals, and I would find my action called handbook policy. Your school may have their own form section, so you may not have handbook policy or what I have here. You may have your own action. So I'll select handbook policy here, and then I'll click add. Now I'm gonna show you what happens. So I'm not gonna display any fields at this time. I'm just gonna save it and click run. And this now basically, if I run it, I get 296 records. What this means is that these are all the students that have that action on their record. But I actually want to display something. I don't want to just get the name of the student. I want to know when they submitted it. So I'm gonna put in the action date. In here, I'm going to display the action date, so it tells me when they submitted the handbook policy. So I'm going to display the action date, and I'll click Save here. And if I run it, then it actually tells me when they submitted the handbook policy. But I don't like the fact that it's action date, because if I'm running this report later on, I have no idea what this means. So I go to my fields, and instead of saying action date, I'm actually going to call it handbook policy and save it. So now when I run the report, it actually tells me, okay, these are all my students, and these are the students that have submitted the handbook policy. So now another thing comes up. What if I also want to see those people that have not yet submitted the handbook policy? In DMT, this was not possible. As soon as you would use the student actions table, it would only give you a list of those students that had submitted it or actually had that action. So in the DAT, we have the option of left joins, which basically means that you can, if you select or without, it'll give you the results that do not match your original criteria, meaning that even if you do not have this action, they'll still show up, but it just won't have any date displayed. So if I say with or without, and if I click results, now I should get a lot more records, and a bunch of them is hard to tell here, but there are certain people, like all of these records, that do not have a handbook policy. So records with handbook policy would have a date and a time. And again, even here, you can say that, like, I don't like showing 12 a.m. on each field, so I can just go to my fields, and I can just say a simple format like this, because I don't like that the 12 a.m. on it. So I can just see my dates in this format without the time. So now I have a list of all the students that have submitted the handbook policy. I have the date. And in the same report, I also have people that have not yet submitted the handbook policy. So in those cases, the handbook policy would be blank. Now, let's assume that, or let's say that I also want to add other columns, or I want to see who submitted a photo release or a field trip permission. I can just keep adding additional student actions table. So you can reuse the same table over and over for other things that if you wanted to. So I'll click add again on this info, and I'm going to go add the student actions table again. This time I'm going to say, instead of saying handbook policy, I'll say, let's say field trip permission, and same thing, action date, I'll make that visible. But again, this time I'm going to say with or without because I also want to see people who have not submitted it yet. And then I'm renamed the alias to field trip permission. And I'm going to change the display to be similar to the first one. And then I'll do the same thing for my last one. So I'll go back, I'll add with or without. And I'll go ahead and do student actions. And then I'll go ahead and say action description equals photo release. And I'll say action date. Okay, so I have photo release action date. Again, I'll go here, set this to the right format. I'll say photo release here. Click save and run the report. Now this is nice. Now I can say, okay, Janie submitted these forms already. So I can say which forms have already been submitted for each record. And actually, let me go back and look at my. Okay, so we have the action date, we have the handbook policy, and then I have, oh, sorry, in the example, I forgot to add a condition. So let me go ahead and add the second condition. So the first one was handbook, the third one is photo release, but I think I forgot to do this one. So let me do field trip permission add, and click save. Let me run the report. Yep, so now this looks a lot better. I can see each student record and whether or not they have submitted the handbook policy, the field trip permission, photo release, and when they have submitted it. So I can see for each student and when they have submitted these records. And then there are some students that have submitted field trip permission but not handbook policy or photo release. Some have submitted photo release but not the other two, and so forth. So I can kind of see all of that information in one report. Now, one thing that some of you may have noticed is that when I first created my report with my students only, I had 934 records, but now I have 938 records. The reason is because I might have some records that had submitted a handbook policy or field trip form or something last year. So they might have more than one record. So if I wanted, I could go to my conditions and I could also add a condition to say academic year equals a particular academic year. So I could say that academic year equals 17-18, or better yet, I could say academic year equals current year. And that way my report would always be updated to show the most up-to-date version. So this would work the same way as the previous report, and you can kind of use this functionality to have a report with different columns, and in each column you can show who has submitted different parts of the forms, and this can be used with many different scenarios. So let me move to the next report. So we have about, I think, 10 minutes or so. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start a new report. I'm going to go ahead and do admissions. I'm going to do inquiries. I'm going to grab the inquiry. Actually, I'm just going to grab the academic year for now, and I'll actually grab the inquiry ID, and you'll see why in a little bit. So in this report, what I want to demonstrate, how the use of the functionality called pivot. So just give me 1 second. Let me pull that up. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and so I have my inquiry ID and academic year. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how the functionality called pivot works. What that does, it takes your rows and it puts them in different columns. So for example, let's say that I have my inquiry ID, inquiry first name, inquiry last name, and let's say that I have academic here. And if I just run this report by itself, it tells me all the applicants that I have in the school. Let me actually order it so it looks better. So I'll say inquiry first name, last name, academic year, inquiry ID. So I have all of my records and what academic year they had applied in, all of my records in the school. Now, what I can do is I can go back here and I can say academic year, and I can use the multi-action, or sorry, the multi-select, and I can select a few academic years. Let's say I want maybe 18, 19, 17, 18, 16, 17, 15, 16. Let's say I want these 4 academic years. I'm going to add them as a condition. So I only want to see people from these academic years. So let me add this, and I'm going to run the report again just to show you what things look like right now. So now it gives me a list of all the applicants and only in the academic years that I had selected in my previous condition. So now comes the part of pivoting. What you can do is you can hide everything but the academic year and the inquiry ID. You can go to your fields, and you'll notice something called aggregate. So if I select, come here, and say pivot aggregate equals count inquiry ID, what that's saying is that count how many inquiries I have per academic year. So I go ahead and save it. And then if I run the report, what it does is it takes all that data and it separates them into different columns. What it's telling me is that I have 5 applicants applying for the 18-19 year. I have 132 applied for the 17-18 year, 134 for the 16-17 year, and 91 for the 15-16 year. So this is a pretty cool feature to have if you're running reports where you're trying to get a total per academic year. This would be a really simple, easy way to kind of count all of your numbers per year. So I'm actually, I haven't gone over how to save the report. So once you have a report, you click save. You can give it a name. So I'll just call it webinar, and I'll call it totals per academic year. And I'll put it in a group that I created for the webinar called PCR DAT webinar. And here I can give permissions on who I want to be able to view it. If I want my admissions team to be able to view it, I can give it like admissions full, admissions read role. If I want other teams to be able to view it, I can give the appropriate permissions as needed. I can also put in a specific, like a more detailed description here of what the report is about, so forth, and then I can go ahead and save the report. So I've saved my report, and then at any time I can go to DAT, I can go to the group that I had stored it in, and I can pull up that report later on at any time. So this one is webinar totals by academic year. So quickly, the next thing I want to cover is the admissions dashboard. So if I go to the admissions dashboard, I want to show you how you can add a report that you created to your admissions dashboard. So if I go to my admissions dashboard, I have many different widgets here, but I'm going to use, let's say that I want to show that report that I just created somewhere on here on my admissions dashboard. The way that it works is that you go to the bottom, you say new widget, and you can select a widget called Data Analytics Grid, and then you can click Add. And it'll add a widget like this here called Data Analytics Grid on your admissions dashboard. And what you simply do is you click on the drop down and you select which report you may want to add. So in my case, I wanted to see the webinar totals per academic year. So if I select it, the report that I created in DAT can show up here on your dashboard, so you don't always have to go to DAT, find the report. You can always just see it directly here. So that's a pretty cool feature to have. And then there's another widget called, so if I go down here, so there's another widget called Data Analytics Chart. I had. When you create any sort of DAT report, whether it's a chart or it's a normal report, you can add that to this dashboard here. So if it is an actual report, you're going to use the data analytics grid widget. If it is a report that has some sort of a chart in it, you're going to use you would use the data analytics chart widget, and then you can select whatever report you had created that has a chart in it. So that's how that would work. And then I just have one last thing to quickly cover, and then we should be done. So the final thing that I want to cover is I go to my DAT report. Let me see if I can get in there. Click New. Actually, sorry, I'll go to DAT again, and I have my group PCR DAT webinar, and then I have so I'll go ahead and click New. I'll grab the student table, student info, and then I'll just do my stuff: student ID, student last name, student first name. This time I'm gonna link it to the discipline table. So we have a table called student discipline, and you're gonna in a little bit you'll see why I'm doing this. So I'm gonna go ahead and link it to the student discipline table, and I want to know the number of discipline points each of my students in the system. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and I'll run the report. So I have different students. So I have Anastasia, I have Corinne, I have Greg, who has more than one discipline record, and then I have Janie and John. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and order my students. So I'll say student last name, student first name, discipline points, and the ID, and I'll run the report. So I have my list of students and how many discipline points they have. So right now it's showing me like the individual discipline records that each student has and how many points each student received per individual record. So Greg had two different discipline records in the system. One he received 2 points for, the other received 1 point for. Let's say I want to sum them up. The way that I do it is I go to my fields, and we have an aggregate here. So under discipline points, I can come to the aggregate column and I can say sum, and then I can click save, and I can click run. So I think he has, so let me pull him up again. So let me go back here. So discipline points, I'm going to go ahead and put this school ID. So my school ID is the upper school division, which is ID 1. So I'll add that as the condition. And then I'll say sum here, and let me run it again. Okay, so this is giving me, okay, let me go back one, and then I'll come back to it. 1 second. Okay, all right. So right now here is telling me that Greg Delareggi has 1 discipline point, Greg Delareggi has 2 discipline points. This is showing me a unique record in the database, meaning that even if Greg Delareggi has a few discipline types that are 2 points, it's just organizing them into one record. But if I go to query and fields, instead of saying unique rows, I select all rows. Now it's actually showing me individual ones, even if they were the same because they were given at a different time or different day. So these are all the discipline points that Greg Delareggi has. So he has 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Altogether, he has 10 points, and these are separated into the 10 points. So now, if I go back here to my fields, and if I say aggregate sum, I was supposed to do it to the discipline points. So if I say aggregate sum, and then if I run it, it now adds them all up, show me how many total points Greg Delareggi has, or how many total discipline points that Greg Delareggi has. Now let's say that I want to run like a letter to show, or maybe send out a letter to Greg or his family to let them know that he has this many discipline points, or that Corinne has this many discipline points, or so forth. What I can do is I can use something called merge functionality. And the way that that works is that you set up your mail merge data source, and it is similar to how you would do a normal mail merge like anywhere else. You first download your data source. So I'm going to go ahead and download my data source. And then once you have your data source downloaded, then you can use Microsoft Word to create a particular template. So I'm going to quickly pull that up. So then you can use Microsoft Word and you can create a specific template. So I'm going to say that mailings, mail merge wizard, step-by-step wizard. And this part is all explained in the document. So I'm going pretty quickly through this. So let me go ahead and say mail merge, and let me download that one time. Okay, so data source here, and then I'll save it because I don't think I saved it before. So now that I have downloaded my template, I have these records that came from my report, and then I can actually pull in the custom fields here. So I can say like dear, and then I can put in the information in my report. So I can say like maybe the first name and then space, put in the last name. You have, and then I can put in like how many ever points he has. So you have maybe 10 discipline points. Thanks, smart school, something like that. I can create my template any way that I want, and then I can save it in my computer. So I'll just save it as a discipline webinar. Let me put this, and then it has to be saved as a .doc file. That's all explained in the documentation that we have. Once you have the template created, you can go to select here, and then you can go to downloads, and then you can go to your, you can pull up your template here, and then you can click upload, and you can attach your template here. And then you can save the report so that you can run the same report in the future. But once you have your mail merge set up, you can click mail merge button here, and it'll run that template for you. So if I run my mail merge now, it converts whatever data I have into my report. So if I pull up Greg Delareggi, it says, dear Greg Delareggi, you have 10 discipline points. So it takes your data from your report, and you can use that to create a custom mail merge field. So this concept can also be used to create directories or any sort of custom reports like tax receipts and things like that, because you can grab any field that you want in the database, and you can use that to create labels or letters or directories and so forth. So that is all I had to cover today, and we'll be hosting another webinar for DAT regarding maybe finance and development in the near future. But this webinar will be posted to the help page. And if you have any questions about the webinar, feel free to email support@pcreducator.com with your comments, questions, suggestions, and we'll try to answer them for you. We appreciate that you were able to join us today. Thank you.